Hi, Lord. I'm gonna take this tree down now.
Wow.
You just stay away, go back, be careful behind you, and watch it. Go without having cut. Okay, boys.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening, Shmuel. How's it by you? Start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning. Yeah. Don't be afraid.
I'm not afraid.
Don't be shy.
I've been on camera before.
That's right.
I was born on June the 4th, 1925 in Lakewood, New Jersey. And as far back as I can remember, I'm not sure exactly how old I was. Maybe 3, 4 years old. The most vivid recollection I have is when the state of New Jersey condemned my father's cows. He had a small herd of milk cows, Holsteins. They condemned it, claiming that they were carriers of TB, tuberculosis, and they sent trucks to pick up the cattle. And I was sitting, I'm not sure it was my mother's lap or my older sister, and on the back porch of our house, and the barn was maybe 100 feet away from the back of the house. And the truck backed up to the barn, and they went in. The men from the state came in, and they took the cows from their stalls, and they tried to lead them up the ramps on the back of the truck, and they were balking. The cows were balking. They were reluctant to go up the ramp, and the men who came to pick them up kept prodding them, and they used 2x4s, if I remember correctly, to beat them.
Really?
That's right, to drive them up the ramp. And I can recall my mother and my sisters crying over it, because those cattle were like personal family pets. And that's, as I said, that's the earliest recollection I have.
You say you were about 4 years old then?
Maybe 3 years old. I'm not sure.
It's very early memory.
Yeah, well, something like that would leave an impression.
what were your parents' name?
Parents, my father's name was Max,
Mm-hmm.
Max Mollison.
Max Mollison.
My mother, Anna, and her maiden name was Berkowitz. I had 4 brothers. Still have one left.
Yeah.
But altogether there were five boys and 2 girls, and none of us were given a middle name. It just wasn't traditional to do. My eldest brother was named Israel.
Really?
Yeah. And he didn't know that himself until he went to get his driver's license. He needed his birth certificate.
So how
He was always called Sam.
Oh, Sam.
Definitely needed birth
Sam is for Samuel.
That's
Usually.
right, but when he finds it, because it was Yisrael.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Number 2 child was Louis. Number 3 child was Michael. In fact, his birth certificate says Mike, not Michael.
Uh-huh.
The next was my first sister, Sarah. And next was another girl, my sister, Mary. They named her Mary. And again, her birth certificate, she was always known as Mary, as long as we could remember. She didn't know her name was until she needed a birth certificate for her driver's license, which is Miriam.
There are very few Jewish Marys, I would think, yeah.
So, why they started naming her Mary, I couldn't tell you. And then came
A New Testament saint.
the number 6 child was me.
Yeah.
And my name is Morris, no middle name. And lastly, my brother Bernard.
He was the youngest.
He is the youngest.
Did your parents had brothers and sisters in the States?
No. Oh yes, my father had one brother in the States. His name was Uncle Isaac.
Uh-huh.
And he lived in New York. He came quite a few years after my father came to this country, and he settled in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he spelled his name Menison, M-E-N-E-S.
Menison.
Menison, rather than Monison. I think I've told you before. The Monison name is a name that was given to my father when he came in Ellis Island. His original name was Litsky.
Litsky?
Litsky, L-I-T-S-K-Y,
Uh-huh.
from Lithuania.
Both parents came from Lithuania?
Yes, but not together. They came at different times.
Your mother came from?
From, I was told, from the same small suburb of Vilna, a place called Stuchin, they told me. Stuchin.
And your father came
From
from?
the same town.
Same area.
Same town, but they didn't
same
know
town.
each other when they're on the other, in their,
Only on this side of the ocean.
they
met.
acquainted, that's right. When they came from the old country, they settled in New York.
Uh-huh.
As a matter of fact, my father, en route to this country, stopped and worked for, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 in England.
Uh-huh.
He was there.
And only after that.
Then he came from England, he came to this country. My mother, on the other hand, when she came several years later, she had a direct route, supposedly, from
Hamburg.
Hamburg, that's right, Hamburg initially. Hamburg initially is where she left from. And when they got out into the Atlantic Ocean, the ship hit an iceberg.
Really?
Yeah.
Like the Titanic?
Well, only I don't know whether the ship sank, but they evacuated all the passengers. And fortunately, I don't know whether the ship went down immediately or what happened. I didn't get that part of the story. But I was told, my mother told me this, that they were rescued and taken back to Copenhagen, Denmark.
And
then they came to New York on that.
to
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island.
Yeah.
All right.
They lived in New York. My father, when he first came over, he was a bricklayer, not a block layer, you know. He became quite proficient and he had a good job and saved up a little money, and they opened up a store on the east side of New York.
Store for what?
For groceries. Herring, pickled stuffs,
Ah,
smoked fish,
so
same thing that my brother Mike was later.
yeah, so that explains something.
Yeah,
Your affection for herring.
yeah, well, I've always liked good small herring. Nothing better.
So they decided to move to Lakewood.
That's right. Because of my father's health. That's the primary reason. They told he had terrible rheumatism, and at that time Lakewood, New Jersey was known as a health resort among the pine trees, pine air. And many, not only poor people, but many wealthy people came
here.
were already there when my people came. They had large estates, Rockefeller, Gould, Jay Gould, caused clean air, the pine air.
Here in Lakewood.
In Lakewood, that's right, that's right. That's long before Miami developed as a winter resort.
Right.
That was a winter resort for many wealthy families in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There's 3 acres, and he kept about 8 or 10 cows and 2,000 chickens.
How'd they have enough to?
Well, they had to buy a lot of feed,
I guess they did.
but they sold their produce right out of the house there. They started with a little grocery store and their own production. And, eventually, after, I don't know what the exact year it was, but the business grew enough, so my father rented a store up in the business section.
I'm getting you.
And the stump.
And the stump. Exactly. This is a big project.
It really is. Look at that.
Yeah. That's right. As a child, you worked. You had your chores.
Oh yeah. I always had my chores, but I was prone to running away all the time. I wanted to be, that's when I was a little older, when I was 6 years old, maybe 5 or 6 years, when I first started school. I had to walk to school. We all did, of course. It's half a mile away, maybe. But I began to see the outside world, and then when my father wanted me to work, sometime I disappeared.
Uh-oh. So, you were a naughty boy.
Yeah, in some ways.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the naughty mischief that you remember?
Well, some of the highlights.
Yeah.
I used to take off with a bucket. I'd leave the house, my house, and about a mile away there was a small stream that ran through the woods and went. Ultimately it went to the Metedeconk River.
Yeah.
But I used to follow that stream for a couple miles with a bucket, catching turtles and frogs,
Really?
snakes, and bringing them home to my mother.
to your mother
to my mother, and
As-
she didn't appreciate it.
as a present.
Well, I don't know, just to show her what I had found. I used to bring home, I was a very good fisherman as a small boy, and my mother loved fish.
So,
And I used to cut a piece of wood from the tree to string the fish on, and carry home a string of fish.
how about that?
And I used to catch fish when a lot of kids didn't. I remember an incident also that I should have been given a good spanking for it. My mother couldn't catch me, my father wasn't home.
You didn't get spanked
Oh yeah.
when they caught you.
Not by my mother. My mother never spanked me. And my father never spanked me either. But he would hit me with a finger, one finger, right in the face.
Yeah.
And the only one that ever put me over his knee was my brother Mike. And when I did things wrong and my mother complained, he put me over his knee and spanked me. He was 13 years older than me. I had the two older brothers never did, but Mike did. He was trying to teach me things.
Whole life was trying to teach you.
And also, another thing that Mike used to do, you know, I had a tendency, and I'm still a little round-shouldered. You know, I'm not perfectly straight. I don't stay. I never did when I was younger. And I had a tendency to be slumped over a little bit, round-shouldered. And whenever he saw me walking like that, he'd give me a kick in the rear end.
Really?
Straighten up.
Really?
He was put badly round-shouldered himself, much more so than I am.
In the winter, you went ice skating in the lake.
Ice skating, and we used to go down to the lake, but all the way across town to the big lake near where we moved to later on when I was 10 years old. But I can remember as a small child, 10 years or less, we used to have pretty good snows, 3 feet sometimes. And we had sleds, and we had horses and sleighs, horses and buggies, you know. It's a resort town, and this is one of the features of being out in the Pinelands in Lakewood was to ride in the horse and buggies. They had rentals. They used to go park by the lake, and they'd pick up people, and had horsehair blankets that covered them, you know, and the rich people who came to stay at the hotels would hire these, and they'd ride around. And I used to get on a sled, and we'd catch onto these, grab onto the struts of the sleigh runners, and get a free ride, you know.
Yeah.
The horse was pulling and we'd ride. And the driver of the horses would switch at us with his whip, you know, try to make us let go. And sometimes we'd get hit a little bit, but that's one of the...
That's the risk that you took.
That's right. And then when I got maybe a little older, I got more brazen. We started grabbing hold of cars. And the cars took off. We were riding, and
There was never an accident because of that?
well, some of the kids got hurt. My hand almost froze one time. I couldn't let go of the sled. Got so cold.
Really?
Yeah, that's a true story.
The skin got caught?
Yeah. Well, not caught. I couldn't open
open
my
it.
hand. So cold. And another incident I remember when we still lived over on the east side, had a dog, a mongrel dog. I don't know what the mixture was. He had some bulldog in him, but he was my friend. And whenever I whistled for him, he came running to me. He used to go with me out in the woods when I went down along the stream. His name was Jack. And I can remember, I had two neighbor boys. They were 4 or 5 years older than I was, and I always hung around with them. And they beat up on me once in a while, but usually we were good friends.
Mm-hmm.
And We were wrestling on my, I think it was on my front lawn there in our house, and the neighbor, one of the neighbors lived right across the street, the other one about a block away. And they were wrestling and holding me down, you know, and I was squirming, trying to get loose. And I whistled for the dog, and he came running, and he started nipping at him. He never really bit him, but it scared him a little bit, and the dog was missing. And he was found dead laying along the street about 2-3 blocks
The
away.
car hit him.
No, I think it was poisoned. Well, while I was resting here, I thought of a couple more mischievous deeds.
Go ahead. We like that the most, you know.
I'll bet. Don't tell my grandchildren.
That will stay between us.
Yeah. Not when it's on the record.
You're all gonna see it.
Well, we used to walk to school, as I said, about half a mile or a little more, maybe. Number 5 school on East 4th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to cut across a field that flooded when we had heavy rain. It was a low place. There was no flowing water. It's just the bottom of a
low
drainage
place,
area.
yeah.
That's right. And the water would get, well, maybe 18 inches deep the most. And I used to go wading in that as we went, not going to school, but coming home from school. I used to go across in that water and catch frogs. And
You would walk in the water.
yeah, with my shoes on. Then they moved into a rented store up on 4th Street, East 4th Street.
They kept raising chicken and
Well,
produce eggs.
No, once when they took the cows away, they stopped with the milk business. Milk and butter and cheese they used to make and sell. Once the cows were gone, they gave that up, but they still kept chickens. Ridge Avenue, we moved our residence from the east side of Lakewood to Main Street in Lakewood.
Mm-hmm.
And my father renovated a building that he owned. It had been a restaurant, and made it into a grocery store there
On Main Street.
on Main Street in Lakewood. Yes, and that's we didn't live there much more than a month before he died, and he had been sickly, getting more sickly, more disabled, and various diseases and physical disabilities. And that was in September 23rd of 1935. That's when he died. And we had moved into the place just a few weeks before that, so we could be in place before school started. But, well, I don't know whether I should get into that or not. An ugly situation the way my father, he had a heart attack, severe heart attack at home, and they called family doctor, and he came, and one of the means that they used at the time to relieve the pressure on the heart was to cut an artery and let the person bleed to relieve the pressure.
And
Yeah, so he bled to death in the
they couldn't stop the bleeding. They didn't try.
well, I
You
was
can't
a 10-year-old boy. I was
You would know.
upstairs crying and not knowing what the hell was going on. My mother and sister were screaming, and it was a terrible situation.
Mhm.
So that's how he died, and he was 49 years old.
And then your mother left with 6 children.
Well, 2 of them, Sarah was still at home. the two oldest boys were married already, and
Oh.
they had their own place. And that's another little story there. My father had helped them establish another grocery store in which they were the owners on Clifton Avenue. And they were in business for a number of years, and then Sam, or Yisra, and Lou married sisters. Two brothers married two sisters. And they got to squabbling, and finally the grocery store split off, and Lou was able to buy a liquor license next door to the grocery store on Clifton Avenue. So there were two separate businesses, but there was a walk between. You could go from one store to the other on the inside. You didn't have to go out. And eventually Sam's marriage broke up. He's the one that stayed in the grocery store, and then his marriage broke up and he sold out, and Lou retained the liquor store, and he was in business for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
We used to visit them, used to stop in their businesses and see them on the way back and forth to school, Bernie and I both.
Everyone stayed in
On
Lakewood,
Clifton
so
Avenue.
that kept them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all stayed there except Sarah. Sarah got married and moved to Atlantic City. That's where her husband was from. And then years later, my sister Mary moved down to Atlantic City also.
So Grandma was at home with Aunt Mettie and you and Uncle Bernie?
And
both-
Sarah, right
Sarah
after
was
my
still at
father,
home?
she was still at home, but she wasn't there more than a couple of years after he died. Then she got married. And then Mettie stayed, and Bernie and I were there helping, doing our chores. We used to keep the shelves stocked, wait on customers, and deliver.
Okay.
How did you speak to Grandma in English?
Sure.
She spoke
She wouldn't want it. She told us not to speak, and
Yiddish?
and she never taught. She didn't want us to learn. They talked, well, once in a while they talked Polish and listen. Yiddish I learned not from being taught, I just from listening.
So they spoke Yiddish together?
They spoke Yiddish together, and a lot of their customers were Jewish people that spoke
Yeah.
Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them were what they called greenhorns, people from the other side that had the same background as my parents. Some of the neighbors there. Harry Finkelstein. He had a little chicken farm behind us, and he used to carry his eggs and peddle them in town.
Mhm.
He used to walk by our house almost every day, I guess. My father, I didn't hear him say it myself, but I've heard my mother and siblings repeat it, and that's where I picked it up. That the night that Harry Finkel died, he died from a heart attack also, and my father said that he felt that night that Malcolm Lewis was in the neighborhood.
Your father.
My father said he
Said.
felt that he was there.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people feel
It's
things.
premonitions, you know.
Yeah. So where did you go to school?
I went to public school when we lived,
In Lakewood.
well, in two places in Lakewood. When we lived on Ridge Avenue on the east side of town, I went up to the 4th grade, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in the public school there. And then when we moved to Main Street, I went to Clifton Avenue Grade School, which was through the 6th grade at the time, 5th and 6th grades. And then we went to a junior high school, it was in Lakewood also, but in a different location.
What do you remember from the junior high school?
That's when I had my appendicitis. I had my appendix taken out. I had one of the lead roles in operetta that we sing, you know.
Really? What was the name of this?
Who the heck remembers? I don't remember what
A
it was.
musical,
Yeah,
kind of?
yeah. And I had my attack appendicitis.
In the middle of the show?
No,
the play?
no, before.
Ah.
I never got to perform.
Oh, what a loss. So instead of participating in the play, they took you to hospital for operation.
That's right, that's right. They took it out and never bothered me since.
Once it's out, it doesn't bother you.
Do you think the world of show business have a loss, a great loss, because you didn't participate?
I never gave that a thought, no. Did I finish school?
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, I finished through high school, the 12th grade.
Do you remember if you were a good student? Or?
Little above average, maybe.
Enough to go through with not...
Yeah, I wasn't a serious student. There's some subjects that I liked, I did well in. History, geography,
Mhm.
and biology, and even chemistry.
How'd you do in French?
French, oh yeah, you want to hear that story? Yeah, in my, well, I was in high school. I had signed up and I was taking what they call a college preparatory course. They take certain prerequisite courses that are required by most every college. And most of the colleges at that time required either 3 years of one foreign language or 2 years of two different foreign languages, 2 years each. And I took freshman and sophomore years, I took Latin, and I enjoyed it. It was challenging, and I liked the teacher, got along fine. And the following year, after 2 years of Latin, I decided maybe I'd take French. So I took French in my junior year, and I just a smart-ass kid, that's all. What can you say? And the boys in that class, almost all of us, used to torment the teacher, and she couldn't discipline us. We used to make her so angry, and not just angry, but unhappy, that she used to go out in the hall and cry.
That bad.
That's right, but she couldn't discipline us. And so I wasted that year and gave her lots of chorus. And I would have and should have failed the course, but she called me aside and said, "Morris, I won't fail you if you promise me you won't take French 2 the second year."
So, but at that time you had planned to go to college.
Well, I had plans. I didn't know where the money was going to come from. My parents didn't have hardly anything to send me to college.
No,
Your mother.
Your
My
father
mother,
was long
yeah,
dead.
yeah, that's right.
Because you were the only one from all the family to go to college. From all
Yeah,
of your
but
brothers and
they
sisters.
all, well, Nettie took commercial course, Bernie took a college course, college prep,
But he didn't go
and
to
he had
college.
better grades than I did. And, well, by the time he got out of high school, he was there helping my mother. The summer before I went into the Army, after I finished high school, I got the job as a lifeguard at the Lakewood Lake, hired by the municipality.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Tell us about it. Well, actually I was a pretty good swimmer, developed.
From chasing frogs in the pond.
Well, that gave me the first wet feet. But I took lessons from the lifeguard, who was a lifeguard at that beach. He was going to college. In the summer he used to work there. Charlie Shame was his name. And he was a very good swimmer, better than I ever was. But he used to give us lessons, and the Red Cross had programs going that they would come, I don't know, twice a week or once a week, and give instruction also for swimming and life-saving.
Yeah, life-saving.
Yeah. And I did well. And I had the qualifications. I got my junior life-saving, senior life-saving, and then instructor. And by the time I had finished high school, so that's how I was able to get the job.
As a lifeguard.
Yeah.
On the beach?
Yeah, the lake, in the lake.
Ah, in the lake.
Yeah, yeah. Municipal beach, an open beach. And I had several incidents where I had to pull people out that were on their way to drowning.
So nobody drowned on your shift?
No, no.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them got a hell of a scare though.
Yeah, of course. And so the girls adored you.
Some did. Some did.
Usually they do with lifeguards,
Some of them showed it.
especially young and handsome like you.
Mm.
Hmm?
Yeah, yeah. They turned their heads every time.
Okay.
I know what you're driving at with Beverly.
What? Okay. Tell me the story with them.
I told you that I never knew her when I was a lifeguard. She knew me. She came to the beach with her cousin Bubbles. And
And she put an eye on you then?
I don't know. That's what I was told. Bubbles told me that.
Oh, I see.
And she didn't deny it.
16 or something.
Wow.
14.
That's right. 14 years old when I was 18.
Yeah.
No, but
That's right.
I had other girlfriends that I took out that were, yeah,
You're more your age.
yeah, maybe 1 year younger, same age.
Mm-hmm.
And I got acquainted with a couple of young ladies who came to the beach, who corresponded with me all the time I was overseas.
Oh yeah?
We wrote back and forth, yeah. Yeah.
So, what did you plan when you were working as a lifeguard for the future? Or did you plan just to be a lifeguard all your life?
Hell no. At that time,
Yeah.
you didn't have any thoughts, but the war was on, that you're going into the service.
And so you wanted to enlist?
That's right. I tried to enlist in the Navy. I had a preference, and they gave written tests for what they called a V-12 program, which was the program where the service you would be sworn in to the service, and they would send you to college for specialized fields of work. And I passed the written test all right, and then the recruiting officers came down and to have an interview with us, and they checked your vision and your eyes and your heart and your lungs and what else, and they found I was colorblind or defective color perception. They said there's no way you can get into the Navy. They used the color flags.
Right.
Said the semaphore.
Right. So
So I said, the hell with it, I'll wait until they draft me.
So you actually joined the army in 1943.
In September of 43.
Yeah.
I didn't enlist, they signed me. When you go in, you don't know which service.
That's right.
I went to Fort Dix and spent 1 week there being processed. They give you shots, they do checking and whatever they do. And then they put me on the train and sent me to Macon, Georgia for basic training, infantry basic training, as a replacement for the casualties that was a 17-week basic training course.
What type of rifles you had at that time?
M1,
M1?
Garand.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we trained in. We fired light machine guns, BARs, and Thompson submachine gun, grenades. For 17 weeks in basic training. They gave us a 10-day, what they call a delay en route,
Visit family?
Yeah, and then I had to report back to Fort Meade, Maryland here, which I did. And from Fort Meade, and they put us on a train again and took us to Hampton Roads, Virginia. That's the seaport where the port of embarkation for troops. Put us on Liberty ships. You know what a Liberty ship is?
Yeah.
Okay, they were cargo ships primarily, but they were modified to carry troops as well. Before, at Fort Meade, they had us, issued us, God knows, 2 duffel bags full of clothing. Heavy coats, winter clothing, all kinds of stuff. Hell, I thought, rumors were, we thought we were going to go to Alaska.
Siberia.
Well, we carried those 2 duffel bags across the Atlantic Ocean and through the Mediterranean, all the way up, halfway up the boot of Italy, dumped them on the ground so that they could redistribute it. They used us for donkeys. But no, but while we were on the ocean going across, we were in part of a convoy. It was primarily replacement equipment and munitions for the Air Force. We didn't know where we were going when we left. But during the trip across the Atlantic, we had several, I don't remember, 3 or 4 maybe, submarine alerts. I didn't witness any actual attack, but we were warned we hadn't to...
You had to put on your...
life preservers, yeah. And also, at night, they wouldn't allow any lights whatsoever. Nobody could smoke on deck, or in fact, they locked us down in the hold after dark. They locked us in the hold, the troops. The Navy asked for volunteers to relieve the Navy gunners on the 20 millimeter cannons, and I said, oh, I'd rather be up deck than down in that hold if anything happens.
That's right.
So,
good thinking.
well, I stand a chance if they can get in the water. So I did. I volunteered, and they taught us how to use the 20 millimeter cannon. And one of the benefits of it, the bakery, the Navy baker used to bring us fresh loaves of bread. You could smell it. Oh, that was something too. And we had some target practicing while we were going.
How long took the voyage?
Exactly 4 weeks.
Oh boy.
It was a slow, you know. They're cargo ships. It took a full month to go from Hampton Roads, Virginia, to the Adriatic side of the boot, the back side. And we also had several alerts when we went through the Strait of Gibraltar, submarine alerts. And when we went through the Strait of Gibraltar, one thing, the first time I had ever seen schools of porpoises. They were following the ship, you know, diving up and down. That was the first time I'd ever seen them. Wonderful scene. I remember that. And they told us when we went through the Strait of Gibraltar, they stayed as close to the African coast as they could because the Germans were in Spain. And they were watching us.
Right.
But we continued on, and we dropped anchor at Palermo, Sicily. We couldn't get off the ship. They just anchored there to get new supplies or something, or drop something off. I'm not sure what it was. And they warned us that the Italian people were coming out in their boats, offering us citrus fruit, oranges, grapefruit. And they told us, don't take any of it, don't donate it because of dysentery and all kinds of crap. We stayed there a couple days, anchored in Palermo. And then they took off again, heading east. We went around the boot of the
Italian boot.
And up on the Adriatic side to Brindisi. Well, we walked carrying these damn big 2 duffel bags each, stuff God, I don't know what the hell, they weighed probably 150 pounds together. And we carried them to the train station. And we got on they loaded us onto these old World War I cars and packed us in. You could hardly have room to sit down. We were standing up with all our bags and stuff, and the train took off, and very soon we got up into a mountainous area, and the train could hardly move. You know, it could barely pull the load it had. And we got out of the train and walked alongside the train instead of riding, because we were all cramped up inside. And well, we went over the mountain. That took a day and a half, I guess.
You went north.
North,
When was that?
February. Yeah, 44, that's right. And we were being sent to Infantry Replacement Depot outside of the city of Caserta, 40, 50 miles south of Monte Cassino. They were fighting. That was the front line at Monte Cassino at the
I
time.
heard about the Battle of Monte Cassino.
Yeah. Like I told you, they had, when we got to, first thing we did, we got to the replacement depot. They told us, bring your bags and dump them all in the pile. 2 bag loads of clothes. And they needed them for the winter. They had just come through the winter, and who the hell knows? But we knew that the Jews were in trouble,
Yeah,
being killed.
right.
And I carried that in my mind when I was there being shot at in Italy and France. I said to myself, I'm never going to let them take me alive. And knowing I wasn't about to take my mezuzah off and throw it away. The replacement depot at Caserta, the infantry replacement depot, was built on a dairy farm. And there was lush pasture there. I can remember finding piles of 4-leaf clovers. I hunted for them, and I found lots of them. And I pressed some, and I think I got some of my little Bible that was issued, a little Jewish Bible for the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a couple of them in there yet. So maybe that's why I came home. I found some 4-leaf clovers. At the time we came to Caserta, at night, we could see the flashes from Cassino, from Monte Cassino, where they were bombing and shelling them, and we vaguely could hear them, but we could see the flashes, tremendous explosions. They were bombing the Germans, and in their dug-in positions there on the mountain. But we did some walking, I guess, and some calisthenics to keep us in shape, and they gave us new equipment, took everything we brought with us, and then they issued us new stuff that we needed. And kept our weapons clean. About 2 weeks we were there, and they put us on trucks and took us to Naples, to the port in Naples, and put us on LCIs. You know what they are, landing craft
Ship
for
with
infantry.
flat bottom.
Flat
For landing.
That's right. They can run up on the beach. They told us where we were going. We're going to the beachhead, and that's only a short trip, a few hours, 3 hours maybe. And when we got there, right away we started hearing explosions. The Germans were firing from the mountain, they had these big railroad guns, and they were shooting at the ships in the harbor. They marched us to the assigned positions, and the first night on Anzio that I spent there, they had us dig in foxholes right alongside of a battery of 155 cannons, howitzers, and they opened up at just about dusk, just before it got dark. They opened up, and the ground was trembling, you know. And my buddy Stanley Remaze, I remember his name, but we were laughing at one another. We couldn't. Your body was just shaking. You couldn't stop from the
Vibration of
the whole
heavy
ground,
guns.
the whole thing. That's right, the guns. And so that was the first night we spent there. Then they moved us to more permanent positions. We were assigned to a specific company and platoon put up on the front lines, which was along the Mussolini Canal, one of the branches of the Mussolini Canal. Those canals were about 5 or 6 foot deep, and the water was low, and we dug in our holes in the side of a bank, like a muskrat. We stayed in our holes all day long. We could hear this railroad gun, this Anzio Express they called it. The big shells, huge. They're railroad guns. They had tunnels in the mountains. You see, the beachhead was all flat. Let me tell you a little bit going back. I wasn't in on the initial landing at Anzio. I was sent up as a replacement. But in the initial landing, there were 3 divisions abreast, and they took the Germans by complete surprise, and they were able to move 10 miles inland before they ran into anything. And then the Germans saw what was happening. They brought in replacements, and they started shooting at them from the high ground. They had control of the mountains there. So they were driven back, and they were hemmed in. That's why the beachhead stayed as a beachhead for the whole winter.
Mm-hmm.
The initial landing on Anzio was in January. I didn't come there until March.
They got stuck though.
That's right, they couldn't break out. We were stuck in the holes beside the canal. I remember catching a few frogs and frying them on
Ah, your experience helped you.
We had these cave rations, a heavy waxed carton that made a good fire, and you take a canteen cup and you could make hot coffee with it, you know. Mm-hmm. And we caught a few frogs and fried them too. It's the first time I ever ate frogs' legs, and they weren't bad.
You ate the legs?
Yeah. And on these patrols at night, we come out at night and the tracers going in all directions and explosions here and there, everywhere. We were sent out to make contact with the Germans to try and locate where their forward positions were. And we did. We contacted them, exchanged fire, and fortunately I never got hit, and the people in my patrol didn't in that particular location. But one thing that sticks in my mind, one of the fellows that I took basic training with, when they threw the flares up, you know, everybody dropped to the ground. He just flattened out and didn't move. Of course, that's where they expose you.
Yeah.
So the machine guns could open up on you.
Mm-hmm.
So this one fella, I don't even remember his name now, but he broke down and started crying, just like a baby. He's crying for his mama. And they got to me. So we helped him get back. He wasn't wounded. And just all the noise and this fear of getting hit. 6 weeks, I think. 5-6 weeks.
And then there was a counterattack and...
No, it wasn't a counterattack, it was an attack to break out of the beachhead and also to bypass Monte Cassino. And that's what they did. They didn't capture them. They went around them. We were on the move. This was after we broke out of the beachhead, and we started getting shelled. And I dove through the cellar window to get out of the way of the shelling. And I had my pack on. I went through the window and broke it open, but I couldn't get back out when I wanted to get out later until I took the pack off. And we took prisoners. We shot some, killed some. Once we got close to Rome, the Germans made the decision they weren't going to make a stand there, and they moved out. So the opposition was gone from the city of Rome itself. Otherwise, everything had been demolished if they had put up a fight there. And once Rome was taken, we were relieved from the front line with another new division and went into bivouac. We stayed on the outskirts of Rome, camping in their pup tents for about a week, I guess it was, and during which time I was able to get into Rome with a few of my buddies, and we saw a lot of nice historical scenes there. St. Peter's, we were in St. Peter's Cathedral. There's a lot of stuff still there because the Germans, well, they didn't touch the Vatican, I don't think. When we left the bivouac area outside of Rome, we were trucked just below the city of Battipaglia. That's on the west coast of Italy, to receive amphibious training for a landing in southern France. We had training, and we had a number of mock landings where they'd take us out on the ship and load us up and then run us in. And one day they decided that they were going to give us an afternoon at the beach. They loaded the whole company up on army trucks and drove us down to this place right around on the beachfront, on the ocean. And without any instruction or anything, they just let the guys get off the truck and run into the water. And the first damn thing you know, there were dozens of guys out there floundering. They couldn't get back in. The undertow was pulling them out.
Yeah.
As soon as you got in, I went in after some of them, but as soon as you got into the water up to your knees or a little less, it swept you right off your feet. You couldn't stand. And some of them weren't good swimmers, and they were dragged out and they drowned. I pulled in 3 of them that I can remember, and I was so exhausted, and by then there was no more floundering around out there, but 3 bodies washed up a little later before we left that drowned. They couldn't get to them. I remember one fellow's name, George Bittner.
The drowned?
He drowned, yeah. Fortunately, I had a little experience with some undertow, you know, and I knew, and I would tell these other fellows that they're trying to fight against the tide, and I told them, let the water take it out. And when it starts coming back in, you come in with it. Then you go swim as fast as you can. But when the tide's going out, let it carry out. Don't fight it. They exhausted themselves and they drowned. I remember one incident where we went through a Italian farmer's field of cantaloupes, and he came out screaming, we're trampling his crop and ruining his crop, and I didn't sympathize with him until I grew my own cantaloupes. As far as eating, we were bivouacked while we were receiving this amphibious training. We were bivouacked in an apricot grove, and the apricots were just ripening, and we had our bellies full. Delicious. And that's where I got a Geronimo haircut.
Geronimo haircut?
Geronimo, yeah, the maid shaved this all on the side and leave a strip in the middle.
Really? You
Yeah.
did that then?
I had a picture somewhere. And then I shaved the rest of it off. Took the picture and then I shaved the rest off.
Why did you shave? Why did you?
Just do something crazy, you know? Why did somebody get a tattoo? Well, some other fellows did too. Say, I wasn't the only one. So, when the time came, they loaded us up onto these troop ships, and we sailed around, I don't know, a week, more than a week, sailed around in the waters out there. And they finally came through and told us that we were going to land on the 15th of August. And that's what we did. There were 3 divisions abreast, and we were in the middle. And we fortunately ran into the lightest resistance of the Germans. Actually, the boat I was in the first wave, and they were landing. We never got our feet wet. The landing craft ran right up, came out shooting, and 25 yards maybe, there's a stone wall and a railroad track running right along the wall. And we didn't run into any enemy resistance for, I don't know, a couple miles inland before we ran into anything. While we were moving inland, we saw, I don't know, dozens of our gliders that had wrecked. The traps, the Germans had, you know, the wires, strung wires,
Yeah.
poles, where they had crashed, flipped upside down, torn apart. But that was prior to our landing, and we never saw any evidence of the troops that were in them. I don't know where they were or what happened to them, but there must have been a hell of a lot of casualties. How they got out, I don't know, because we were the first wave to come in. We continued inland until the resistance, the Germans started shooting back. They were establishing a line of resistance, and finally we had to stop for the night. We dug in and took off again the next day. Our artillery came in and tanks, and day after day, here and there we'd have different towns that we were assigned to take and clean out the Germans, which we did, and each one was a battle in itself. And we rode, when the Germans ran fast enough, we had to get on the tanks to keep up with them. They were pulling back, and at certain points they would stop and give us a bad time, hold us up for a while. Our flying fortresses, squadrons of them, came overhead. They were bombing ahead of us, bombing the German positions, and a beautiful sound. Don't forget the beautiful blonde girls riding the bicycles. And when we drove the Germans out of Grenoble, we found a factory that was making wooden bullets.
They must have run out of metal. Why would they make wooden bullets?
Because it makes more damage.
You're damn right. Tear you up more.
Suffer more.
The wooden ones, the splinters, pieces go in you all over. You know, in the infantry, you don't know what happens
From one day to the
once you
next.
pass through.
That's right. You keep going.
Now, this was beyond Grenoble. We kept going. The Germans were running. They were retreating. I was assigned to go out on a patrol with 3 other men in a jeep, and to reconnaissance work up in the mountains there, the French Alps. And we came to a town way up in the mountains, and they said that they had never seen a German soldier there. And I don't know who the hell, whether you can believe them or not. We got up around Epinal, and we were fighting from village to village and driving them out. And there was one town by the name of Vaudeville that I can't forget, of course. The approach to the village was all farmland, wide open space. So difficult. They were set up in the town with artillery and mortars and their infantry. Of course, they were sitting there waiting, the Germans were sitting waiting for us to come. Wide open fields, pasture hay fields surrounding this town. And we were approaching it, and I was #1 scout, lead out right out on the point, and they cut loose on us with mortars and small arms fire and pinned us down. I got into a little ditch, a little defilade there on the side of the road, and I kept trying to raise my head to see if I could advance forward. And it was a long distance. It's probably 100 yards between where I was and where the edge of the village was, where the firing was going, or even more than that maybe. And every time I lifted my head a little bit, ding, and the bullet would come through. He just missed me. And I tried that several times, and then I just laid there for a while. In the meantime, our tanks started to move up and started shelling the village. John Talone is a fellow from Trenton, New Jersey. I took basic training with him. And he was a BAR man in another platoon from mine. But we were fighting right alongside one another, and he got blown up. Well, he got a piece of shrapnel from a mortar shell, went right through his helmet, and out the other, one side out the other. He never knew what hit him. After the shelling was pretty intense on the Germans from our tanks, and some prisoners came out from the town with their hands up. 2 or 3 came to us walking across the field with their hands up. Kamerad, you know. So we took them prisoner.
You didn't shoot them?
I felt like shooting them, but I didn't. It was too obvious. But one of the soldiers, we stripped them of everything they had when they came in. I took a watch from them, but he started telling me hard luck stories about his brother was sent to the Russian front and got killed.
He was speaking in English?
Yeah, enough English so I could understand him.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me about your brother. You just tried to kill me, didn't you?
Yeah.
So we took him prisoner, sent him back, and then we continued to move on and took the rest of the village. And we took more prisoners. Those that wanted to retreat escaped and took off. And so that village was cleared. Things bogged down again near the town named Fremefontaine, and that's where we ran into considerable resistance. The Germans had established a line of defense there also, and we moved to the point where, again, the shelling got so strong and the small arms fire that we got bogged down. We had to take cover. There wasn't much cover other than behind trees, of course, and we fired back at whatever we could see and thought somebody was there. Most of it we couldn't even see, but at that point we were being shelled by the Germans. They were shooting shells into the tops of the trees, and
The
shrapnel would scatter all over.
Yeah.
And some of our men were hit, and we finally we came to a standstill, and we were told to dig in our positions. We were going to stay overnight. We finally shelling in our advanced patrols were able to drive the Germans back some more. They kept retreating, and we kept chasing them. Wherever there was any resistance, they would assign a company or a platoon or whatever was necessary to
Take care of it.
move them out, to
Yeah.
get rid of them. It was from the same location outside of Bremerfontein, before the Germans started retreating, that they counterattacked us. I think it was the second day after we had dug in our positions. They counterattacked, and they came right up. We were dug in, and I remember shooting from my foxhole out in the open. But there were Germans right close by, within 25 yards maybe,
Running toward you.
coming towards
Charging.
firing, and they were coming, jumping from tree to tree also. And I'm quite sure, and we never got to see whether or not we or I shot any of them, but I'm sure that I hit at least one. But I never did see they backed up. The night before this incident, we heard locomotives off in the distance, and it was close by, and this was after dark already, so nobody went out. I mean, nobody was sent out to find out what it was about. But the next morning, first thing in the morning, my platoon was given the objective to take a wooded hill just to the north of us that was occupied by German soldiers. We didn't run into any resistance there. The Germans, during the night, evidently had pulled back. And so we went in, we got to the hill, took the hill, we dug in, or we started to dig in, and off in the distance I heard a voice holler, "Is that you GIs?" It was on the squad next to me, to my right. And one of the fellows over there hollered, yeah, who's that? And the Germans opened fire on us from all sides, from three sides around it. And our platoon leader said, shortly after the Germans opened fire on us, the platoon leader said, "Pull back, get out of here." And I didn't hear the order, but the squad next to me.
Might have been too late.
Well, it damn near was. It was for some, and it was for the platoon leader. We found him dead the next day when we came back and retook the hill, and some other casualties. But we had two-man teams digging the foxhole. One would guard and the other would dig. And we were only about 6 inches deep that's when the Germans started shooting at us. All my squad grabbed their stuff and started running. And I stayed behind to cover them.
You knew they were running back?
Yeah, I knew they were. The order came from the platoon sergeant, yeah, and the platoon leader.
Back off.
Yes, they said
Retreat?
go back.
Go back.
Right, that's right.
Okay.
You know what the citation reads? We're ordered to return to their original positions.
Yeah.
Which means retreat. So they were shooting at us, and I was shooting back with my Tommy gun. I had 4 clips, I think, 4 clips of 15 rounds each, and I would jump from one tree to the next and shoot at them whenever I could, and then jump back, go back a little farther, and then shoot some more, and all of my men from my squad got out. They got out all right, and my BAR man, I gave him hell later. He dropped all his ammunition, the bandoliers of ammunition, so he could run faster. And I picked up the bandoliers and carried it back to him, chewed them out good. But Eventually I got back after I used up all the ammunition I had, and then I worked my way back to the
They didn't follow you from the hill?
No, once they took the hill back, because they didn't chase us.
Lucky for you, huh?
And then for that little ordeal, I don't know who, whether it was my platoon leader or whoever, they wrote me up for the Silver Star, and I was awarded that months later. I didn't even know at the time that anybody had written it up. And then we continued on, and several other villages.
Yeah.
I was a squad leader at that time, newly appointed.
Yeah.
I never got the full staff sergeant. I had the 3 stripes as a regular sergeant, buck sergeant they called it. But I was told I was turned in for the staff sergeant, but I never heard anything more of it.
Because you were more experienced, and and you showed
next in
leadership.
line, everybody else in line was killed or wounded and gone. And the next incident that sticks in my mind was already the end of October, and we were again dug in a mountainous area in the Vosges Mountains. That was about 50 miles from the German border, and my squad was sent out on patrol to make contact with the Germans to find out where their positions were. And we were out in the woods. We never saw any Germans out there, but there were artillery and mortar shells going over our heads to the troops in the back. They weren't shooting at us. They didn't know we were there. Well, during that ordeal, we heard one of the shells, knew it was going to land close by, and we all were flat on the ground, but there was on a little bit of a hill, you know, and the shell landed very close to me and splattered me with dirt, and I got wounded. Both legs, my left arm. My BAR man, who was about 10 yards away from me, his leg was blown off and bleeding badly, of course. And I told my assistant squad leader to go back and get the medics, take us back to the aid station. Well, the whole bunch of them, the whole squad went back, not just the assistant squad leader. And I laid there, I don't know how long, but and it was pretty cool at the time, but I was really bleeding. I took my right hand, which was uninjured, and my left hand I couldn't move, arm, and both legs. The shrapnel had hit me and severed the nerves in both legs and my arm. I lay there bleeding, and my BAR man was bleeding worse than I was, and leg hanging. I took off my belt and I threw it to him. I told him to try and make a tourniquet to stop the bleeding, to slow his bleeding. And with my bleeding, I was wearing 6 layers of clothes then. We were dressed for the winter. But I remember there's a bush right there, and I took my good hand and I raised this up. My arm I could feel the blood running. I raised it up, and it seemed to help. So maybe that did help some for my bleeding to death. But I lay there for I don't know how long.
And you couldn't stop the bleeding?
I couldn't. He couldn't. He couldn't either. Or I don't know whether he could or he didn't, because he went unconscious, and I think I faded out too. I think I lost consciousness for a while, and I came back, so I don't know how long I was laying there. But when I was conscious again, I remember, well, I was praying to myself and to God that I figured I was going to die, that my death should be bearable by my mother. That's what I was concerned. And eventually, and again, I'm not aware of the time span. I lay there and I was conscious, and I said to myself, "Damn it, I'm taken a prisoner." But I couldn't do much about it. And I waited and waited. Finally, I heard some voices off in the distance. I don't know how long it was, and I waited until I could tell that they were talking English. I didn't want the crowds to get me. And I hollered out to them, and they came. There was 4 of them, and one had a litter, and the other one, my BAR man was carried back on a litter, and they carried me in a raincoat. Rolled me over into the raincoat, and they carried me back to the battalion aid station. And well, I think I lost consciousness some more, and I don't remember much. Well, from the battalion aid station, they did some first aid of a sort. They didn't do any, I don't think they did any operating on me, because I was only there half a day maybe, less. And then they put me on an ambulance and took me to a regional hospital, and that's where I had serious operations. And I can vaguely remember screaming when they were giving me blood, and I had terrible pains all through my body. And I was coming out of shock, I guess, from the whole thing. I don't know, but eventually I came around, and they did some major surgery on me with the nerves, sewing up and picking out the shrapnel that was superficial. I had a piece in my side of my face, and I had in my left elbow and in both legs.
And they got all of it?
No, they didn't get all of it, but I still have some.
They got most of
Kept
it.
for a souvenir.
They got most of it, you mean?
Yeah, they got most of it, and of course they had to do a lot of cutting to repair the nerves. There was not only some bone chips, and there's no broken bones and such, but the bone chips on my shin bone, and a lot of muscle tissue torn, and they had to make long cuts, long incisions to repair the nerves in the arm, both the legs and the arm.
Oh.
And they did that best they could, thank God. They did a pretty good job. And from there, I was in that hospital about 1 week in Epinal. And they took me from there to the airport. I was flown to another hospital in England for convalescent and additional surgery. They did some more operating on me there, and they put me in a cast, both legs. My arm was in a separate cast, but I had the full girdle around here except for my privates. and the 2 legs were in cast.
Yeah.
I had subsequent operations after I got back to the States, but I was in England about 2 weeks, I think, and that was just before Christmas. That's when we heard about the breakthrough in Bastogne, London. I don't know what harbor we sailed out of, but they put us on the Queen Mary, which was being used as a hospital ship. While we were on the ship, I was in an upper litter. They had bunks 3 high, and
You could walk?
no, I couldn't. I I was immobilized. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even.
With the cast yet, or without?
Yeah, still with the cast. Yeah, they didn't take the cast off until I got to California.
Mm-hmm.
But it was rough water, and I remember getting not real seasick. I didn't throw up, but I felt like I was going from
Close
side
to
to
it.
side all the way.
Yeah.
So we sailed, and no incidents during the trip back to the United States. We came into New York Harbor. They unloaded us onto ambulances, took us to Staten Island, which is another Army hospital. And that's when my family came to see me from just south from New Jersey. And I was wearing a beard.
So what? They didn't recognize you?
Oh yeah, they recognized me. They knew I had a beard. I had written and told them.
Ah.
So I think my sister Met is the one that spotted the beard. So, but they would have recognized me. I'm a little thinner, but
Who else came?
my mother and Dad, Mike and Elaine, and I think Bernie did too. When I was in Halloran Hospital on Staten Island. In fact, the next day after we were admitted to the hospital there, people came around and they wanted to know where our home was in the States so that they could send us to a facility, a hospital, close to home. So it could be convenient for family to visit. Within a week, we got the orders that we were going to California. They were going to send us to California.
Close to home.
Yeah, close to home, that's right.
That's Army for you.
Yeah, that's right, that's the Army.
So they sent you to California?
Sent me to California, and I think he was a second lieutenant. He took off. He went AWOL from the hospital when he heard the orders they were going to California.
They said, how you are
And
sending me to California.
And I might have if I'd been able to walk. Every one of those boys' homes were on the East Coast. Every one of them. I got serious therapy, physiotherapy. They didn't do any more operating on me in California. I couldn't walk on either leg, but I strengthened my leg. Like I used to get up after they turned the lights off at night. I was told to stay off my feet. I wasn't supposed to walk. Well, I used to dangle my feet over the bed, and after I don't know, a week or so maybe, I tested myself and I got down and put the weight on my feet, and I gradually worked myself up to where I'm getting around in a wheelchair and walking a little bit in Modesto, California. And that was Hammond General Hospital. I enjoyed to stay there when the nurse used to come and give me a back rub every day.
That was your therapy?
Yeah, that was part of it. And she's the one that kept telling me, stay off your feet. I got regular therapy every day. And eventually I was able to walk with crutches. And in the period of 3 months that I was there, by the time I was able to walk on my own a little bit, they gave me a 30-day convalescent leave to go back home to New Jersey. And when I got home to New Jersey, of course I saw family members and everybody, and then I was supposed to go back in 30 days back to California. Well, my sister Sarah, who lived in Atlantic City, was active in the Jewish community down there, and she knew some doctors who worked. They were in the Army, but they worked in the Army hospital, which was the tourist hotels down there. They turned them all into Army hospitals.
In Atlantic City?
In Atlantic City, on the boardwalk. So she had some contact with a rabbi, who in turn had contact with some of the doctors there. And I was advised to go and see the doctor, and they would examine me and see what the story was, and if possible, they could admit me to the hospital in Atlantic City. Instead of going back to California, I went to Atlantic City and they admitted me, and they notified them in California that I didn't have to return. Now, when I was in Atlantic City, they gave me therapy. They also did some more operating on my arm and my right leg, whirlpool, and I did some pottery work. You remember seeing it?
Occupational therapy.
Occupational therapy.
Learn pottery.
That little ashtray, where's that little ashtray? I've seen it recently. Is it in the closet there?
With
With the Thunderbird on it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you make that?
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
I didn't realize that.
I made that.
just-
So, and from Atlantic City, after they operated on me there, I'd only been there maybe a week, 2 weeks. They gave me another convalescent leave, 30-day convalescent leave to go home to Lakewood, New Jersey.
Huh.
I had to come back in 30 days.
Ah.
They just sent me home so they wouldn't have to take care of me in the hospital.
Yeah.
And I was well enough to look after myself and get around. So they do that. Because I was assigned to Atlantic City as, I guess it was 8 or 9 months. The GIs from the hospital used to go out and sit on the boardwalk, and watch the pretty girls go by. One of the fellows I was friendly with, we were sitting he had one leg blown off, the lower leg, and a little boy was walking. He walked over to this other fellow, and he said, "What happened to your leg, mister?" And he says, "I donated it for hamburgers." That scared the hell out of the kid.
Another hamburger in his life.
Smart aleck.
Yeah.
When I was well enough, they sent me to Camp Upton, New York, which was a convalescent center. They just gave you exercise and they build you up a little bit, fed you very well.
What was the name?
Camp Upton. It's out on Long Island to get you ready for discharge.
Yeah.
And that's where I was there about a month only, I think. And then I was discharged from there.
Discharged from the army?
Yeah, that's right.
By that time
Yeah,
the
I
war
was
was over.
discharged in 46. During one of the periods when I was at home on convalescent leave from Atlantic City, my brother Mike bought a farm in Jackson. He put it in my name. And the plan was that I was going to grow pickles for him. really didn't know farming. I knew a little bit of gardening, but I never farmed it. I never knew what a disc was. I thought it was something that spun around like this. I tried to apply at Rutgers and they told me it was too late in the season. This was in May of 46. So they suggested that I take a short course, a 10-week or 12-week course.
And you were interested in
growing pickles.
growing pickles. So farming.
Yeah, farming, vegetable growing.
They had a subject like that?
Oh yeah, it's College of Agriculture.
Oh.
And you know one of the reasons I wanted to be a farmer? I didn't mention it earlier on. When I was in Caserta, the replacement depot in Italy, we used to stand in chow lines, and when we finished, we'd go out and, well, we sat in the open anyway and ate, but when we were finished, anything we had left over in the canteen deal that we had, we'd throw in a big drum. It was swill, what we thought, feed the hogs with. Well, we had little Italian kids coming there with cans, scoop, absolutely.
You're hungry.
That's what
Pitiful.
made me want to be able to grow my own food. That and another incident when I was still in France. I saw French civilians come to the farm from some of the villages and towns where they weren't farmers themselves, trading silverware for a dozen eggs,
Sure.
something to eat.
You can't eat the silverware.
Yeah, that's true.
All those things made me want to be able to grow my own food, and of course that's ridiculous. So I took the short course and I did well in it, and I applied for the full 4-year course, a baccalaureate degree for 1947,
Mm-hmm.
and I was accepted and I went. And of course I got married.
Wait a minute. How many years did you study?
4 years. I hadn't been married a year yet. I met Beverly
Never.
one of the times when I was home on the Lane route from Atlantic City. I was introduced by Bernice, by Bubbles. She was going with Bernie, my brother.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I met her. And when I started college, I was already married. When I graduated college, 3 of my children came to my graduation. Well, almost all the men in my class, the class of 51, not only in agriculture, but the whole college, I bet 75% were GIs.
So Laurie was born in December 20th, 1947.
That's
And
right.
you were in Rutgers, a student in.
That's right. The first year I commuted from Lakewood. We had a little house in Lakewood that we rented. Can you remember, on Fifth Street?
Fifth Street.
And in my sophomore year, we rented a place up outside of New Brunswick on the lake up there, Lake Farrington, in Milltown. Isn't that what?
I think so.
Milltown.
Yeah.
And we spent 2 summers there, I think. And of course, there was Mickey and Debbie were born. And Mickey is June of 50,
49.
49, and Debbie is August of 50. And we built a house in Jackson, the old farmhouse there. That was built the year after I graduated. We were living in town,
Also on Fifth Street.
Fifth
So I
Street.
remember that. So how did we go back to the same house?
Maybe I'm mistaken then. That's when we lived there.
Right, we must have lived someplace else the first year.
Yeah,
Because Fifth Street I remember.
yeah.
We moved from there when I was 5.
So after
After
graduation,
graduation, which was in June of 1951, I went to work farming for full time, trying to make a living. Well, while I was still in college, I did farming, but it wasn't the vegetable crops, or very little of it. But when I graduated, after I graduated, I went pretty much full time for market vegetables, including sweet corn, and tomatoes, peppers, melons, cantaloupe, watermelon.
Laurie told me she as a girl, remember that she used to work on the fields.
Yeah, she used to help, sure. All the children did, once they were big enough. I used to have them weeding and sometimes picking, didn't I, Laurie?
Picking, planting.
Yeah, and picking weeds out of the coal frames.
Mm-hmm.
So, sure, they were help. They had to be.
Yeah.
Well, most families that lived on a farm operated that way. They depended, if not entirely, to some extent, on the family labor.
Yep.
And I think that's still true. So I continued farming, and like I said, when I had a poor year and I didn't have sufficient income to take care of the responsibilities of the family, then I did work in town and got paid from my brothers. Like I said, I came out of college in 51, and in 19 55, I guess it was, I was asked to work for the Department of Agriculture, taking a agricultural census, which is taken every 10 years.
How come they found you?
Well, I had the qualifications. I guess I applied for it. They were looking for people to. It was a part-time job.
Yeah.
Taking a head count of the farms in my township, in Jackson Township, and the type of operation they had, and what their incomes were, and number of children, what have you. A general picture of their operation,
Yeah.
their farming operation.
Right.
So, and I met a lot of people, got acquainted with a lot of people, and it was a very interesting job. Well, a couple years after that, Beverly and my next door neighbor convinced me to run for the Board of Education. That was in 1957, I guess. They talked me into it. I didn't really want to, and well, Beverly was involved with the PTA at that time. She had been, I think, president of the PTA in Jackson Township.
Yeah,
when
she was
children were in
busy all the
school.
time.
Yeah. Before I ran for the Board of Education, I had served on the Ocean County Conservation Commission, the ASCS committee.
What is that?
That's a local body that administers a federal agricultural program, payments for certain practices that farmers perform.
Uh-huh.
And I served on that for quite a few years, 4 or 5 years, 6 years maybe, until I got on the Board of Education. Then I gave that up. On the school board, that was a very challenging job, because it's like any public office job, whether it's elective or appointive. You can't satisfy everybody, and when you make a decision, there's always somebody going to be unhappy.
So it's at the beginning of politics for you.
Well, yeah, it's, you see, school board business is not supposed to be, and it isn't political parties, you know. To get elected, it's an elective office,
Yeah.
and to get elected, you got to play politics a little bit.
Okay. So you did.
Tactics, I did, and I got elected every time I ran. The first time I ran, there was only 100 ballots cast, and I got all of them. But I was re-elected five times. Well, the initial plus 4, 15 years I served, and 8 years of the 15 I was president of the board. And while I was on the board, we built several elementary schools, and we built a new high school, the first in Jackson Township. Prior to that, we had always sent our high school children to Lakewood, that's right. And Lori was going there until I moved to Toms River. And Mickey graduated from Jackson High School, first class. Well, Mickey started in at Rutgers. He was accepted, and he started in his freshman year. Finished the first semester. And he came home and told me he doesn't want to go anymore. He doesn't want to go to college.
Why?
I said, well, he didn't know what he wanted. He was fed up with the competition, the cutthroat competition. He was with a lot of pre-med students. This is what he told me himself. That they would cheat and cut your throat to get a good grade.
Right.
That's right. And he was just disenchanted altogether, and he wanted to leave. And I suggested he join the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps. And no, well, he had already been indoctrinated to the communist leanings up there at Rutgers University. That's where he got tangled up. That's my estimation, and there's no question that he became socialized in the full sense of the term. Then no, but I finally said to him, I said, well, if you want to leave the country, I said, it would be a wonderful experience for you to go to Israel and see how some of the rest of the world lives.
Yeah. Some of the socialists live there.
And he agreed to that. And was able to get him in the Ulpan plan.
That's right. So you convinced him to do it?
Well, I suggested it. I didn't convince him.
Mm-hmm.
He had his own mind as what he was looking for, but he didn't know what he was looking for.
Right. So he started in Ulpan, and I was the social leader there.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a handsome young kid, played guitar, enchanted all the ladies in the kibbutz.
Mm-hmm.
They were crazy after him.
Are you being recorded?
Everything is recorded.
Good. So Mickey was the first one to leave the country. We followed him about 6 months later, I guess.
Yes, she came to visit in Israel.
And then I joined them in June of 1970. That was my first trip to Israel. My first meeting with Shmuel,
Oh yeah,
my prospective son-in-law.
those were the days. All right.
Well, I went to a lot with Mark and Natalie was there. Were you with us? That was in 1970?
I took you there.
1972 when Billy was
We
born.
slept in the Wadi.
Yeah? And Madeline kept being afraid of a flood,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course, in between there was a little disruption in the family, as you know. People see things differently and do things differently and want different things out of life. And they follow their own pursuits. In my last term, I was offered a job with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Farmers Home Administration. They offered me a job, and at the time, I wasn't doing too well in farming, and I decided to take it. ASCS stands for Agricultural Soil and Conservation Service. My first assignment was as an assistant county supervisor in Freehold, New Jersey. And I was there about a year, and then I was given a county office. I became a county supervisor for Burlington County. The office was in Mount Holly. And that job I enjoyed. It was very interesting. I was dealing with farmers, and usually the lower end of the scale of prosperity in the farming business that needed more counseling and advice. And even though I wasn't terribly successful in my own farming,
You had a lot of experience.
and I had experiences, and some of my shortcomings were beneficial for them. I
Yeah.
was able to advise. And in Mount Holly, is where I met my current wife. She was working as a secretary there, and well, there was a attraction, I'd say, that eventually wound up in a marriage years later.
That was after the divorce.
Oh yeah. I served as a county supervisor in Mount Holly, and then I was promoted to what they call the Farmer Program Specialist for this whole state of New Jersey.
In Trenton.
In Trenton, that's right. And while I was working in Trenton, the political picture changed from a Democratic administration to a Republican administration, and they decided to consolidate New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland into 1 office. So they combined the 3 states now, and It remained, the state office remained in Trenton for about a year until they could get reorganized, and then they moved it to Newark, Delaware, as the state office for the 3 states. And so I then had to report to Newark, Delaware, which is just about 100 miles from Jackson, my home in Jackson. While I was in the state office for the 3-state area, we had Hurricane Agnes in 1972, which was terribly devastating for farmland. As a result of the damage that was done, the losses that were suffered by the farmers of Hurricane Agnes, my state director up in New Jersey assigned me to have 2 weeks of training in Washington to get acquainted with the people down there and gain some experience in dealing with bigger operations in the farming business. And I went to Washington for a 2-week training, and when I got back, I got an offer from the Washington office to come there with a promotion, of course. And Nancy came to live in Washington after...
We came to visit you when you were living in Washington.
Yeah, right. Because
They had a big apartment
Right,
there.
on the 13th floor in Arlington.
That's right.
Well, when we first came to Washington, we lived in a private home that a dentist owned in the city of Washington. And we spent about a year there, or a little less maybe, and then finally decided there wasn't adequate quarters for us, so we went shopping for an apartment to live in temporarily, because the long-range plan was to buy another farm in Virginia. I worked all over the country then, not just 3 states. It was in the whole 50 states. And I was working there as a farmer program specialist, and I traveled to many of the states in that first few years. And well, I got a good reputation for handling some of these deals. I got good recommendations from people, and I got promotions down there, 2 promotions while I was there over the years. Different legislation was passed to allow us, and I say us, the Farmers Home Administration, to make loans to bigger and bigger operations. Most of our county offices had not been dealing with the larger farmers, the more successful farmers. They've been dealing with the poorer farmers. And so they sent me around to do some stuff. I went out to California, to Hawaii, to New York State, the Dakotas, Louisiana, Mississippi, for shrimp operations.
What's wrong with that?
No, I enjoyed it. It was a wonderful experience. And I learned a lot myself. That was in 72, 73, and 74. I was involved in traveling around. And then what happened, the state director for Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey was found to be stealing from the government. They told him that either he resigned or they were going to fire him. So he resigned, and there was an opening up there for the state director for the 3 states. And I was working in Washington. In Washington, I was under civil service, and the state director's job was an political appointment. So they required that you give up your civil service protection, the status, and if you accepted a political appointed position. And I made a decision to do it. And I knew all the people up there. Yeah, I got good contacts. I didn't have good relationships with all of them, but it was a political appointment. And I had my administrator for the whole national program, General Elliott, was my administrator, who I worked for and did special jobs that he determined I should go out on.
Yeah.
And he took care of getting me appointed through State Senator Chase.
Oh yeah.
That's right. I was appointed to the state directorship of the 3-state area of Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey. So I went back there. Well, I served there just about 2 years, and there was a change from the Republicans back to the Democrats. And when Carter beat Ford, in fact, all the state directors who were appointed under the Republican administration were let go. And I was able to go back to Washington, to my old job as a farmer program specialist and as an assistant emergency loan director, and then as the director. And I stayed until I was retired in 1990. Since then I've been out here puttering around on the farm. Planted nut trees and a few fruit trees. And not making any money, but I get a lot of exercise. I had been having some offers for the land for construction of residential housing. And I explored it, and I decided that I was going to try to get the area, my farmland, about 55 acres, rezoned. It was at that time zoned for agricultural purposes. In order to maximize the use of the land, I decided that I would try and get a new zoning of 1/2 acre, which I eventually did. It took I don't know, 6 months or longer, and finally I was able to get an approved subdivision for 1/2 acre. Melissa is really the first one that indicated that she was interested in make a company and for building houses.
Yeah.
And Greg at that time was working for a real estate company that built and owned and operated a number of residential units, apartment houses and condominiums. So they had that background, and Melissa had been working as a salesperson for Jack LaLanne, was it?
Mm-hmm.
And so she had some business experience. And with my experience, and when I was a county supervisor in Mount Holly, I had considerable experience in construction of residential units, because our programs provided for that for lower income people. And so I learned quite a bit about construction, and also the ways and means to subdivide land. So I had the background, and I pursued it, hired engineers and lawyers and whatever was necessary, and eventually got the subdivision approved. So first we did the piece on the west side of Bartley Road. It was only 10 lots. And after we got working on that, I went ahead and had the rest of the farm subdivided, and had another 45 lots out of that. So we had work for several years there in building and selling those units. Actually, I sold the land to the companies that we set up with the three of us in it. And we developed that, and then when we were pretty well on our way with the second section, there was an opportunity, and then I explored the buying of an adjacent piece of land that was already subdivided in half-acre units from a lady by the name of Catherine DeBow, which I've known ever since I was a little kid. And then we picked it up, and that was another 36 lots. In a couple years, I guess we sold out on those, and yeah, I wanted to live on a farm.
Yeah.
Mars wanted 100 acres with a stream, with road frontage. He had all this.
With all the
criteria.
house.
Prerequisite.
Well, the house was my criteria. He
Yeah.
didn't really care about a house.
And also she had to have a mountain view.
And we looked and looked, and we couldn't afford the hunt country of Virginia as much as I really liked it. So Mars saw this ad in the paper about this farm here in Maryland, and I had never considered coming to Maryland at all. And we came out, and he saw that they were growing alfalfa on the field, and he right away said, if you can grow alfalfa, it's good.
Chestnuts.
And he had chestnut trees.
Chestnut trees
And-
already planted.
Dream was to have a nut orchard in his retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And so the house I thought was abysmal. I really thought it was abysmal. I cried. He wanted this house. We bought the place, but then as soon as we could save enough money, we would do large renovations.
Well, we moved in here in
79.
September of 1979.
So you have now your chestnuts,
And every other kind of nut.
orchards, and
Yeah.
all these walnuts and pecan trees that you planted, and you have your garden here, and you're happy
Yeah.
in your
We are,
little
yeah. Paradise.
piece of world.
And our birds.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
birds, yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
Very
It's
interesting.
really great setup here.
We enjoy the life here. Even
Yeah.
though it's a lot to look after, we both enjoy keeping it,
Mm-hmm.
and we share
But,
all the work. We can decide to just keep trim what we're able to do,
That's
what we
right.
do.
and yeah, but it
That's
makes it
right,
even
too.
smaller.
That's right.
Well,
You
you
know.
seem
We
to.
built a pond across the
Well,
road.
that was
That
built
was
just a couple years after we got here. It's got a watershed that feeds into it. There's no
Oh.
springs. And we got some fish in there. We had real nice fish when I first built the pond.
we couldn't wait until the first geese came,
Yeah.
and then we couldn't wait. I couldn't wait till they nested, and we could see the little gosling.
And I invited the geese to come. Or we invited them, and I protected them. The first geese that nested here.
I was told once that if you have a swan on the geese will leave, just like the ducks leave when the geese take over. We used to have 40, 50 ducks on that pond. We don't see them anymore. And then I was told that a pig, if you put a pig over there, they'll run the geese and the young ones off. Well, I
They'll
don't-
eat them. They'll eat them.
Well, whatever they do. We never found the swan. We never found the pig, so we still have the geese.
There's open water here, and at nightfall, just before it gets dark, you hear the geese honking. They're coming in from all directions and they land on the pond. The pond is covered solid with geese. And this year there were 4 batches of young ones that were raised here. We saw when they get maybe a month old or even younger than that. You see them sometimes. They come out of the pond and they go down into the stream and they walk over here eating the grass.
Oh, don't hide. What are you hiding for?
Look out, you're going to break the camera.
Who? Good morning, Moise.
Good morning, George. How are you?
I'm okay, you know. Oh boy, you two look like a...
Thank you.